Welcome back to the Four Lakes Church of Christ meeting here in Madison, Wisconsin. We're so glad to have you with us for our midweek Bible study. Today we're continuing with our study of the book of Judges. So we hope that you will join us in Judges chapter 3 in just a moment. With my travels out to the Pacific Northwest over the past several weeks, we have been taking a few weeks away from our study of Judges. And in my absence, we've heard 3 lessons from an actual judge. So we had those 3 lessons from Alan Hires, who passed away about a month ago. But I hope you found those lessons both interesting and also helpful in some way. We looked at the use of instrumental music in worship, as well as the use of choirs and solos in the worship assembly. Those are some subjects where Brother Hires has done quite a bit of reading and research, and those were helpful to me. I hope they were helpful to you as well. If you are only joining us through the YouTube notifications, and don't get the emails, then you may not have received the links for those. So if you want to go back, if you want to listen to those or watch those, feel free to get in touch. I'd be glad to send you those links directly. But as always, if you have any questions, any comments about today's class, if you have something that we need to be praying about as a church, if there's some way we can encourage you spiritually, we want to invite you to get in touch. Send me an email message to info@fourlakeschurch.org. You can also call or send a text to 608-224-0274. By way of very brief review, especially since it's been a few weeks, the judges in the book of Judges are not the kind of judges that we might expect to find in a courtroom. So these are not men with black robes, with a gavel sitting behind a bench with a bailiff off to the side. But instead, these people are deliverers. They are those who come in at the very last moment to rescue God's people from oppression. And often they ended up leading the military, but they were not necessarily military leaders. A lot of these people were regular, everyday guys. And we should also point out here at the beginning that in the book of Judges, we're going to see a pattern that repeats itself over and over and over again. And so we start there at the top where things are going pretty well. They have peace and prosperity. And of course, this starts with Joshua. Of course, it goes from Moses to Joshua. They come in, they take over a good part of the land, and things are going incredibly well. However, because things are going so well, the people start drifting away from God. So the thought is, we're strong, we don't need God anymore. And so they very slowly slip away into sin. God then sends an enemy to kind of snap the people back to reality. They then call out to God for help. They turn to God in repentance. God then sends a judge to deliver his people from oppression. Things then settle down, they prosper again, and the cycle repeats itself. We're going to see this cycle repeat itself a number of times throughout the book of Judges. And so I can almost guarantee that we're going to see this graphic again and again and again. As simple as it is, this is basically the book of Judges in a nutshell. Well, one major theme of this book is found in the very last verse, which is there in the middle of your screen, where the text says that in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So nobody was in charge, and people did whatever they wanted to do. And I think that reminds us that they were not following God's law in those days, but instead everybody did pretty much whatever. And obviously this sounds familiar to a lot of us these days, and that is we live in a time and place where people today pretty much do whatever they feel like doing. You can't judge me, they say. But we've also noticed in our study of Judges that despite evil in the nation at the time, there were always some who stayed faithful. People like Ruth and her family, for example. And so we learn throughout this book that our faith does not depend on the faith of the nation as a whole. In other words, my city, my state, my country, people next door to me may be doing some horrific things, but that really should not keep me from following God. I can be pleasing to God on my own, even if I am in a nation that disagrees with God's plan. And that's comforting to me. I hope that is to you as well. We can always personally do what's right. So in chapter 1, we've got Judah and Simeon attacking a local king and cutting off his thumbs and his big toes. I mean, that's how the book starts. So out of nowhere, it's an incredibly violent, bloody scene. And surprisingly, that king had already done that to a bunch of other local kings in the past. And so he sees this as God's judgment, that he's getting paid back for this. And that's how it starts. So it's off to a violent, bloody start. Then in chapter 2, we have this messenger of the Lord coming in and encouraging them to stay faithful because God's going to stay faithful to them. However, we learn that once Joshua dies, they almost immediately start serving the Baals, the false gods, and that cycle continues. So this brings us now to Judges chapter 3, and in Judges chapter 3, we're going to find the first 3 judges. However, before we look at the text itself, one more little intro note here, I want to give a brief preview with a list of the judges. So now we can kind of track our progress through the book. I don't know, maybe I need to gray them out after we've looked at them, maybe little red arrow or something. I'll work on that before next week. But we have a total of 14 judges. There's one fake judge thrown in there, right there in between Gideon and Tola in chapter 9. Abimelech was a fake judge, kind of appointed himself as I remember it. And then also beyond the judges, we have kind of a few chapters tacked on at the end. They're not directly connected with a particular judge, but they record some incidents that do take place during the time of the judges. So this is where we are, and we're now ready to take a look at Judges chapter 3, where we find the first 3 of these 14 judges. So this is where we are tonight. So let's start with Judges 3 verses 1 through 8. Judges 3, 1 through 8. Now these are the nations which the Lord left to test Israel by them, that is, all who had not experienced any of the wars of Canaan, only in order that the generations of the sons of Israel might be taught war, those who had not experienced it formerly. These nations are the 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonians, and the Hivites who lived in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath. They were for testing Israel to find out if they would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he had commanded their fathers through Moses. The sons of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters for themselves as wives, and gave their own daughters to their sons, and served their gods. The sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, and the sons of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. Well, starting in verse 1, we find that there are some nations left in the land. We find that God apparently leaves these people there as a test to see whether his people would obey. They were told to push out and destroy the locals, but will they do it? So it's not a temptation. God isn't hoping that they sin, but it's a test. This is something they've been told to do. Will they do it? And God has given them the power to do this. This is not impossible. God is not asking them to do something that cannot be done. This is doable. However, not only were these nations left in the land as a test, but I also hope we notice that they were left so that the new generation would have the ability to learn war. Remember, these people had been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They were children when they first left Egypt, and many of them had not even been born yet at that time. Many of them had been born in the wilderness, so they had to learn war. And I think this is another reason why some of the locals had been allowed to stay. This was to be a growth experience. This is something that they needed to do. And I do think there may be another lesson kind of somewhat connected to this, and that is we don't always fully appreciate what we have unless we struggle for it. In other words, if something is just handed to us, if something is just given to us in life, we may not appreciate it like someone who had to fight and struggle for what they have. And these people in this new generation coming on the scene really haven't done too much, have they? I don't know if we've thought about that. But they just kind of walked in, didn't they? They walked across the Jordan River on dry ground. They marched around Jericho a few times until the walls collapsed, and then they walked in on that, and that's pretty much it. Had some skirmishes along the way. They did some things, but they needed to struggle to appreciate what they have. And this struggle, I think, is something that we need to appreciate even today. Not long before she passed away, one of our older members at that time, Catherine Bordson, said something that I hope I never forget, but I'd asked our senior saints to give some advice to the next generation. And she said this: I wish that those who are younger than me at this congregation would step up and do more of the work that needs to be done, things that will make sure that a true church will be here in the future. She said, prepare to be strong leaders. A lot of sacrifice was made to establish the Four Lakes congregation. Do not let it be in vain. And I think about that from time to time. I know hopefully we're thankful for what's been done for us in the past, but ultimately, every generation needs to do its own work in order for the Lord's work to continue. And we are the next generation. We are the Catherines of the church these days. So we are the ones who now need to do the work that others have done in the past. And so it seems that God had allowed some of the pagan nations to stay in the land as a test, obviously, but also to strengthen his people. They had to do some fighting of their own to truly appreciate what they were being given. Well, we've got a list of some of those groups in verse 5. But notice, what do God's people do almost immediately? They marry them. Remember, intermarriage to the pagans was specifically forbidden under the law of Moses, and people were actually killed for doing that in Numbers 25. Now, let's be careful how we apply that to our situation today. Under the new covenant, we have not been specifically forbidden from marrying those outside the faith. In fact, we have some scriptures telling us how to act if we are married to an unbeliever. That's why I say that. But we do need to be aware that there are some challenges. There are some things that we need to be aware of. We may be setting ourselves up, for example, for some serious disagreements concerning how children are taught. Who's going to bring those kids to church? Who will teach them the Bible stories? We may be setting ourselves up for some pretty serious arguments concerning how our money is spent in the family, how our time is spent, our attitude toward outsiders, and so on. I can think of one situation at the church where I grew up where an unbelieving husband actually disconnected his wife's spark plug wires on a Sunday morning to prevent her from going to worship. And yeah, I know that's an extreme example, but the Christian faith is hard enough without the discouragement of an unbelieving spouse. It's not impossible, and we need to be thankful for those at the Four Lakes congregation who converted their spouses. I mean, that's an awesome thing right there. But we do need to at least be aware of the challenges, I think, especially in a time where we have a choice concerning who we marry. Generally speaking, we choose. Our parents don't set this up for us. But even with this choice, I think we would emphasize with that choice comes great responsibility. But back in Judges 3, 6, and 7, notice what their intermarriage led to. It caused these people to compromise their faith. They gave their children to the locals in marriage. They served their gods. They forgot the Lord. They served the Baals and the Asheroth. And in response to this rejection, this is rejection, that's what it is, God allows his own people to serve the king of Mesopotamia for 8 years. 8 years is a long time to serve another king. So let's continue then with Judges chapter 3, verses 9 through 11, the next paragraph. Judges 3, 9 through 11. When the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the sons of Israel to deliver them. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. When he went out to war, the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, so that he prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. Then the land had rest 40 years, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. So in verse 9, as a result of their enslavement to the king of Mesopotamia, the Israelites cry out to the Lord for help. God sends Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. In verse 10, we find the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and Othniel then uses that strength to judge Israel, going to war with this king of Mesopotamia and prevailing. As a result, Israel has peace for the next 40 years. And it's kind of hard for us to imagine a figure like 40 years. So to put that in perspective, sometimes I try to think of a figure like that in terms of my own life and try to plug it in maybe to our own national history. 40 years ago, of course, right now we're in 2025, so 40 years ago was 1985. What were you doing in 1985? Some of you didn't even exist yet. I was probably in 8th grade back then, maybe getting ready to go into high school. Ronald Reagan was president in 1985. Have we had peace for 40 years here in the United States? No, we've been involved in multiple wars and armed conflicts since 1985, haven't we? However, when these people cry out to God for help, as a result of the judgeship of Othniel, the Israelites have peace for 40 years. That's huge. And I don't know if we always appreciate that, just the benefit of having peace for 40 years. But let's remember our cycle. They're now at peace. So what do we expect might happen next? That they're going to forget the Lord and do evil. So let's continue then with Judges 3, verses 12, 13, and 14. Judges 3, 12 through 14. Now the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered to himself the sons of Ammon and Amalek, and he went and defeated Israel, and they possessed the city of the palm trees. The sons of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. So once again, after 40 years of peace, the people once again do evil in the sight of the Lord. And as a result, God doesn't just allow, he strengthens Eglon. He raises up Eglon, the king of Moab, to come in. And Eglon, in turn, rustles up some others, the kings of Ammon and Amalek, and they defeat Israel in battle. They take over the city of palm trees. And we aren't told explicitly what city this is. It's kind of a strange reference. Many assume that it's most likely a reference to Jericho, but that the author couldn't get himself to say that. It's just hard to say that Jericho was conquered. So what psychological significance might there be to losing Jericho? Jericho was the first city to be conquered after they first crossed over the Jordan River. So this would have been a significant loss. These people have told their children about the conquest of Jericho for decades now. And, there were monuments, there were piles of stone commemorating their victory over Jericho and the crossing of the Jordan. But now, apparently, Jericho has fallen back into the hands of the enemy. So, that's kind of like us losing the city of Boston or losing the city of Philadelphia. It's not just the strategic nature of it, it's the psychological impact of losing a city that was so important in the formation of your nation. But the point here is the Israelites now serve Eglon, the king of Moab, for 18 years. And again, 18 years is a long time to be enslaved to some other nation. So let's continue with Judges chapter 3, verses 15 through 23. Judges 3, 15 through 23. But when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord raised up a deliverer for them, Ehud the son of Gera the Benjamite, a left-handed man. And the sons of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon the king of Moab. Ehud made himself a sword which had 2 edges, a cubit in length, and he bound it on his right thigh under his cloak. He presented the tribute to Eglon king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. It came about when he had finished presenting the tribute that he sent away the people who had carried the tribute. But he himself turned back from the idols which were at Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he said, Keep silence. And all who attended him left him. Ehud came to him while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber, and Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat. Ehud stretched out his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. The handle also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the sword out of his belly, and the refuse came out. Then Ehud went out into the vestibule and shut the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. So notice in verse 15 the cycle continues, doesn't it? After 18 years serving King Eglon, the Israelites cry out to God for help yet again. God sends now Ehud. And let's notice the interesting little detail we have on Ehud. This man is left-handed. And I believe the Hebrew, I was looking into it earlier today, the Hebrew says something about being bound, as in bound in the hand. And it doesn't literally say left-handed, so it says his hand was bound. So he might have been maybe disabled in his right hand in some way, causing him to be left-handed. That's kind of the leading speculation on that. We don't have a lot of clarity. But for whatever reason, he was left-handed. But Ehud's job was to deliver the tribute, the taxes from the Israelites to the king of Moab, their oppressor. Well, we find that he uses a 2-edged sword that he made himself. When a people are conquered and you don't want them to rise up, you keep them from owning weapons. You take away their right to defend themselves. And so maybe that's why he had to make his own sword. We're not told, but that certainly makes sense to me. This sword is a cubit, so that's 18 inches, the tip of the fingers to the elbow for the average man, about 18 inches in length, double-edged sword, homemade. He binds it on his right thigh under his cloak, his outer garment. Now, let's pause for just a moment and remember the historical significance of a right-handed handshake. Are we familiar with that? I mean, it was originally, as I understand it, a sign that I'm not about to kill you with my right hand, since most people are right-handed and would bear a weapon with their right hand. So if I'm shaking your hand and I'm and our hands are together, we're not going to kill each other. That's kind of the theory behind a right-handed handshake. And so Ehud then has an advantage, doesn't he? In that King Eglon will really never see this coming. It'll be kind of a surprise, something that he's not expecting. In verse 17, we've got an interesting detail concerning King Eglon in that he was extremely fat. I don't think we have that kind of information about anybody else in the Bible. I mean, this is kind of unusual. He was extremely fat. Personally, I'm getting the mental image of Jabba the Hutt here. So this ginormous man sitting on his throne. And in verse 18, Ehud sends away those who help carry the tribute. And that tells us it might have been quite the pile. That's a lot of stuff. You got multiple people carrying all the gold or whatever. In verse 19, he turns his back on the idols that were there. He tells the king that he has a secret message. And the king calls for silence. Everybody leaves the room. And to me, it's interesting to see how Ehud says, I have a message from God for you. He sure does, doesn't he? Eglon doesn't care about the God of the Israelites. He's defeated him in his mind. But the king stands up as if to pay careful attention to this secret message. However, Ehud takes his left hand, grabs the sword off of his right thigh, and he jabs the sword into the king's oversized belly. And it's here we learn that the king is so fat that the handle of this 18-inch sword goes in after the blade, and the massive folds of flab entirely swallow up the whole sword. And then the king's guts spill out on top of that. Well, Ehud now leaves, locking the door behind him on his way out. So let's continue with Judges 3, verses 24 and 25. Judges 3, 24 and 25. When he had gone out, his servants came and looked, and behold, the doors of the roof chamber were locked, and they said, He is only relieving himself in the cool room. They waited until they became anxious, but behold, he did not open the doors of the roof chamber. Therefore they took the key and opened them, and behold, their master had fallen to the floor dead. So after a while, the servants come in to check on things. It's been a little bit, and they think the king is relieving himself. That's really, I think we call it a euphemism. It's really kind of an over translation, like they tell us what it means without telling us the actual words. I think the text pretty much says that they thought he was covering himself, like covering his ankles, that his robe was around his ankles. So if you get that picture, he's on the toilet is what they're assuming here. But after some time goes by, they start getting worried. And you kind of don't want to walk in on the king when he's on the toilet. I'm assuming that's kind of not done. And but finally they get so anxious about this that they open the door and they find the king dead on the floor. So let's continue with Judges 3, 26 through 30. Judges 3, 26 through 30. Now Ehud escaped while they were delaying, and he passed by the idols and escaped to Seirah. It came about when he had arrived that he blew the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was in front of them. He said to them, Pursue them, for the Lord has given your enemies the Moabites into your hands. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan opposite Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross. They struck down at that time about 10,000 Moabites, all robust and valiant men, and no one escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land was undisturbed for 80 years. For the second time in a row now, the author points out that Ehud passes by the idols. There are so many idols in the king's residence and in that area. It's noteworthy. And this is also a reminder that Ehud kills Eglon in spite of the idols that were there. So the idols provided that king no protection. And then we find out that Ehud, the new judge, blows the trumpet. And so it's not just a one-man show. He's rallying others. And he now leads the Israelites into battle against the Moabites. And as a result, they reconquer the land all the way to the Jordan River, killing around 10,000 Moabites in that process. The result of Ehud's judgeship in verse 30 is that the land has peace for another 80 years. And again, it's easy for us to miss this, but 80 years is a long time. 80 years ago for us right now was 1945. We've had some serious conflicts as a nation ourselves, haven't we, since 1945? So we can't imagine 80 years of peace. But as a result of Ehud's work as a judge, the land of Israel enjoys peace for a period of 80 years. So we've looked at two judges tonight. Let's conclude tonight by looking at the third judge of Israel. And all we have on this guy is in a single verse. Judges chapter 3, verse 31, the last verse of the chapter. Judges 3:31. After him came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. So the third judge of Israel is Shamgar. All we know about Shamgar is his name, and that he kills 600 Philistines with an ox goad. A goad is basically a cattle prod. It's a long, sharpened stick that would have been used for poking oxen to make them move. You can walk in Farm and Fleet and see a whole display of cattle prods. I was wandering through Farm and Fleet for something a few days ago, and I walked by that section. Some of those look like whips. Others look like oars that you would use to paddle a boat. You can like whack an animal with or make a lot of noise, I suppose. Some look like sticks with a kind of pointy tip on the end. Others are electronic, so they're rechargeable. They deliver a shock. And so Shamgar uses a cattle prod to kill 600 Philistines, and that's all we know about the guy. I think there may be a passing reference to Shamgar. The only other place in the Bible is just Judges 5:6. Just his name is there. And so he's here, and then he's not. He just pops on the scene just in time to get the job done and then disappears. Kind of like Esther. You know, she pops in, pops right back out, but saves the day. She's right there at the right moment. All right. In terms of an overview concerning lessons from Judges 3, I just want to make two brief observations. First of all, God punishes his people when they rebel. I think we see that in Old Testament times. There was like this direct connection between disobedience and God's judgment. But secondly, back in those days, God would deliver his people when they repent. And he was just as eager, more so, like he wanted to save them. And that's all a part of that cycle. Prosperity leads to rebellion, which leads to repentance, which leads to calling out to God for help, which leads to deliverance, which leads to prosperity, and so on. And we're going to see a whole lot more of this in the coming chapters. But next week, let's come prepared to take a look at Judges chapter 4. As always, if there's something we need to be praying about, something that we can do or say to encourage you, we hope you'll reach out. You can send an email to info@fourlakeschurch.org. You can also call or send a text to 608-224-0274. As we close, let's go to God in prayer together. Our Father in heaven, we praise you as being the one and only true and living God, the creator of everything that we see around us. We're thankful that you have made a way for us to be saved through the blood, through the sacrifice of your Son. We're thankful for what we've learned today from the time of the judges so many years ago. We know that what we've studied has a very real meaning for us today, and so we ask then that you be with us as we try to stay on the straight and narrow way. We know there are many opportunities to turn away, many temptations. We may even be distracted by the physical wealth of the nation in which we live. And so we ask for strength and wisdom as we navigate life's choices. Thank you, Father, for Jesus. We come to you in his name. Amen.